So about a year ago, my friend came up to me and was like, "Hey, look, I kind of want to start making music. Kind of want to get into music production." And of course, that thrilled me. I love seeing more people get into music and more people expressing themselves through whatever art they want to get into. I thought that was pretty cool. And about a week later, he sends me a beat. He said, "Oh, check this out. What do you think of this beat?" And I played it, and I was blown away. I was like, "What? This is a really good beat. You've only been for only doing this for a week? That's crazy. How did you do this?" And it turns out, he mostly just drag and drop splice loops. So if you don't know, Splice is a company where people upload their, I believe with Splice's permission, they upload their samples to the platform, and producers can just use those samples. And especially if you have any sort of modern DAW like Ableton or Fruity Loops, you can just drag in the audio file. And once you drag in the audio file, it automatically puts the audio sample in time with the tempo of the track that you're working with. So you can just go on Splice and drag and drop things. So, what he did, he's like, "Oh, I like these drums. I'm going to drag and drop these drums. Oh, I like these chords, this melody, this piano. I'm just going to drag and drop those. Oh, I like this bass line. I'm going to drag and drop that." So eventually you just get a really good track because all of these samples are played by usually pretty professional sounding musicians. And so the track sounded pretty good. And I remember when I listened to the track, I was immediately in a mental quandary because I felt some kind of like jealousy of sorts. I spent years. I grew up playing piano, and I spent hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours learning how to play the piano, learning the theory, studying jazz, so that when I eventually started getting into music production around 2015 or so, I was able to play some software instruments here and there and just program beats and stuff like that. But at the same time, I wasn't getting as good a stuff as my friend was getting a weekend. I put in a lot of work. So I was thinking, is this fair? Like, how do I feel about this? On the one hand, I'm happy that my friend's getting into it. On the other hand, it kind of feels cheap. It feels fake. It feels like it's an easy route, And then I got to thinking well, this is probably exactly what producers who grew up producing, in the early 2000s or 90s think about me. They probably you got to play software instruments. You got to sample using an advanced software like a DAW. Whereas, back in the 90s when people sampled, they literally cut tape. So from their perspective, I look like I'm cheating. So how far back does this go? How many times have we cheated? What is cheating? There's a lot of questions to ask here, which I will get into later on in the video. So going back to my friend, how do I respond to this? How do I even give advice? Because I feel like he was going down a path in music production that is completely unlike I did. My instinct was to say, well, you gotta go learn the fundamentals. Go learn how to program drums well. Go learn how to sample things well. All this stuff. But is that even good advice? You can make great sounding stuff with just making splice loops. So what's the point? Is there even any point in learning a lot of these other skills in the craft? So as you can see in the title of the video, this video is largely touching on the Suno and Timbaland drama, but going at it in a way I feel like is more productive, or ways to take a step back and look at the problem in more of a totalizing view instead of sort of isolating and placing blames on individuals and stuff like that. If you saw my last video, I spent a bulk of that video talking about associations and how complex these things can get. And again, in this video, I'm only touching largely on the surface. And if you want to look more into it, there's a lot to look more into. But if we can start thinking a little bit differently about these issues, we might have a chance of progressing in a more meaningful way. and not just placing meaningless blame on people, or if we are pressing blame on people, doing it in a more effective way. So if you don't know, the drama, essentially the short version is this. Suno is an AI music application that you can essentially just make songs using this AI. As the founder of Suno said, you can essentially use it to democratize music more, so that you don't have to learn how to play instruments, you don't have to learn pretty much anything to make a song that sounds pretty good, or write a prompt that makes a song that you're wanting to hear. And then if you don't know, Timbaland is one of the greatest hip-hop R&B producers of all time. I don't really need to introduce him very much. I'm sure most of you, if you're watching this video, have heard of him, or have at least listened to at least some of the beats and productions he's had on some very popular pieces of music. So anyways, Timbaland has become a large contributor, if not higher up in the Suno sphere, and he has largely endorsed the platform, which has created a lot of backlash from artists and producers and consumers alike, who are saying that this is wrong, AI art is wrong, Suno is wrong, it doesn't pay these artists that they're stealing from, and that it's super cheap art, it's easy art, you don't have to know anything to make it, so this is predatory on artists, and there's a lot of arguments that people are making against it. From Tim's side, he thinks that this is a new wave, this is a new technology that it's important to get in early on to have some impact and staying power, and letting the technology just pass by is unwise. These are two perspectives that are constantly fighting each other, and I will get more into the dynamics of both of those parties in a bit. But that's just sort of like the battleground. That is the lay of the land that we find ourselves in for this controversy. So I think at this point, it's best to step back a little bit and try to ask some questions that get at more of the foundational building blocks of the conversation, rather than just trying to go and pick a side and hash out the battle as best as we can. Because if we try to do that without understanding the backdrop of the whole situation, of the conversation itself, how it came about, why it comes about, then we're going to be inevitably lost in just meaningful loops where people believe one thing and other people believe another thing, and it's hard to reconcile them in any meaningful way. So let's step back a little bit. Let's talk about pure art and technology. What does that mean? So earlier, I was talking about how my friend got into Splice and now he's doing all this stuff and it's super easy, and what's the point? And I've been working for so long, and why does he get to have this much success so fast? Is this good? If it is good, then should there be more of it? All of these questions, we can sort of step back quite a bit and try to look at more of the fundamental premises or assumptions or belief systems that go into these anxieties that arise in terms of pure original art, what is seemed as valiant or admirable, and what is seen as derivative trash. So, as a lot of annoying philosophers do, they largely go back and step back conveniently to ancient Greece, which is a little bit annoying, I must say. But in this case, I will pretense by saying this is obviously not an origin of dialogue and concepts around originality in art and so on. These have to go back thousands of years prior to ancient Greece. But it just so happens that we have a very convenient and well-known and easy to understand dialogue around this topic, going back to Plato. So this is specifically the story of the Phaedrus. Now, the Phaedrus is more or less considered to be part of the Symposium, which is another work by Plato, talking about love. But the part of the Phaedrus that I find the most interesting, and which is most interesting for this topic at hand, is the part of concerning the topic of writing. So essentially, Socrates goes to Lysias. Lysias has written down a speech, and Socrates wants to get a hold of this speech because he wants to get all of the little wisdom out of it. He wants to be a little wisdom gremlin and excavate all the wisdom out. But what ensues is a sort of dialogue on originality and the validity of even reading a transcript of a speech. As after all, a speech is the primary source. Even if the speech was written down word for word, it's now not really the speech anymore. All of the various intricacies and cadence of how the words were said, the tone in which they were said, the speed in which they were said, all of these things sort of go out the window once they're transcribed on paper. So is it even the same speech anymore? I think a really important place to begin, and so does an author that I will reference a lot in this video, David Gunkel, who wrote the book Of Remixology, who talks about the Phaedrus a lot, talking about how this is original sort of dialogue on a topic that plagues us to this day, which is originality, plagiarism, and so on. So the question largely is writing a technology? Is writing external to ourselves? Right? Is it something that comes secondarily? So if the producers from the 90s were looking at me easily chopping up samples in Ableton like I'm doing some sacrilegious ceremony, well, reading a book is sacrilegious towards those who believe in the supreme value of oration and the meaning behind that. It's too easy. It's too cheap to write things down, to read things on paper. That's not the real thing. So how, again, these are interesting questions. How far back do we take it? And to some, this might seem like a simple obfuscation of the problem. But the point is, and I think David Gunkel makes this point very strongly, is that we are still living within the framework that Plato developed in the Phaedrus, of the concepts of originality, the concepts of authorship. These all go back to Plato, all go back to the concepts that we hold so dear. So, interestingly, this is what David Gunkel takes away from the Phaedrus, which I think he puts very well. He says, "What is demonstrated in the Phaedrus, therefore, is not that writing is understood as an external and artificial apparatus, but that it is in a confrontation with writing that Plato originally differentiates the use of artificial and external devices from the natural and internal powers of the mind. If we are no longer able to perceive writing as a technology, it is not simply because writing has become so thoroughly internalized and seemingly natural that it no longer appears to be external and artificial. Instead, it is because writing initially describes, structures, and regulates the very distinction between the metaphysical couples, internal, external, and natural, artificial, that is subsequently used to define what is called technology. In a way, then, the Phaedrus does not so much define writing as a technology as it initiates and describes what becomes the very definition of technology, from which one would then attempt to characterize writing as such. Consequently, writing is not just one kind of technology, among others, but constitutes, quite literally, what is considered to be technology." I think this is a really well said statement, and I think largely gets into the problems that bubble up to the surface to modern times. If we're trying to understand writing as a technology, it's, again, not simply an external technology outside of ourselves, but it literally defines the language and way of seeing the world and the binaries that are constructed that are used to examine things like originality, unoriginality, plagiarism, creativity. These sort of concepts are invented and developed with the concept of writing itself. This has really interesting connotations to it if you look at it a little bit more deeply. As Gunkel says here, "On the one hand, subsequent forms of technology have been formulated and understood in terms of writing. This is not just a figurative association. It is literally literal insofar as writing is contained in the names of technological innovations and apparatus such as photography, light writing, telegraphy, distance writing, cinematography, movement writing, the phonograph, sound writing, and gramophone, writing sound. So his point is that writing, this act of writing, this sort of technology of writing, is written and baked into the fabric of all of these different art forms, and that we can't understand these different art forms, like making music, like taking pictures, without understanding it in terms of the what he calls metaphysical couples, or sort of conceptual binaries that are involved in making the art itself. It's no longer the analog vibrance of hearing your friend talk and all of the little intricacies and emotions and all the things built up in the analog, I don't know what the word would be, chaos maybe, or vibrance. It's now written, and specifically the technology is important to understand as writing. Gunkel then goes on a very interesting path associating writing with death. If speech and talking to your friend is this vibrant experience, this analog experience, then writing, this technology of pinning it into a conceptual binary, is associated with death because it doesn't have that vibrance anymore. It's now written down. Goes on to say that when Edison invented the phonograph, it was largely associated by many people in the day as like this haunting device where you can literally listen to people that are no longer alive anymore, which is, we take it for granted. I can go on the internet and find some interview of somebody who has passed away, but for people at that time, it's kind of crazy to think about. This person is no longer, they can't talk to you in a room anymore, but you can still hear them. If that's not haunting, what is? So if we understand writing as technology and something that has permeated all forms of art that we know of, it gives us a sort of foundation for our confused understanding. In some ways, it makes the confusion that we live in make more sense, if that makes sense. Because we're already sort of talking about things that are so subjectively variable that it's hard to really pinpoint and understand them best. Let's talk about, to make this point more concrete, for example, let's talk about sampling and being a DJ or different mashups to begin with. Right now, the hot contention is in terms of artificial intelligence, but before, there was a lot of contentions with just sampling or being a DJ, where a lot of prominent artists and musicians were outraged at the fact that people are just what they called plagiarizing and ripping off music for their own money and entertainment and so on. There are many figures on this side of the aisle. People like Henry Rollins was probably one of the biggest, saying this is stupid. And their point largely comes down to originality. That these artists are not making anything original. They are just replaying other people's work. Why do they get the ability to just replay people's work? That's criminal. That should not exist. And it's similar. Notice that this is a similar argumentation to people give towards AI. Why does this AI get to just rip off people's stuff and people can just create their own songs without knowing anything? This is criminal. The point of bringing up the history and understanding the sort of philosophy of writing and technology and how these sort of disagreements go all the way back to Plato and beyond is that humans have long participated in this dialogue and argumentation of originality, what is pure art, what is pure experimentation in the arts that should be allowed, and what should not be allowed. And so if we notice this and we notice the trajectory of this conversation that goes all the way back, well, we can do ourselves a favor at least and try to recognize that this conversation is never going to go anywhere. You are never going to be able to tell a DJ, hey, look, you're just ripping off people's stuff. You're not making anything new. All you're doing is just playing other people's stuff. And then the DJ is going to believe, well, no, what do you mean? I am creating something new. I am putting the songs together in a way that's unique. I am making sure that I understand the different devices used to fade in and out of songs, to put songs with other songs. All this stuff takes skill. This is all an art. What do you mean? I'm not just ripping off songs. But at the crux of all this comes back to the concept of these sort of metaphysical couples, or these conceptual binaries of things either being original or not original. This is why I've been largely thinking of AI as a continual pushing of the envelope concerning artistry and originality. There's going to be people on the pro and against aisles of the situation that are going to say things like, no, this is different. This is radically different than it was before. And, well, yes and no. In some ways, it's a little bit different. Now we have a robot that is synthesizing and sampling and ripping off all of this art instead of humans. But humans were doing this before. So then you could say, well, now the artists aren't getting paid for all of these inputs. Whereas before you had to clear samples and you had to make sure artists got paid. Well, for the most part, artists didn't get paid, and if they did get paid, that still doesn't answer the question of originality. So regardless, all of these sort of problems are just going to continue to accelerate. And in some ways, I also find that AI is a fascinating sort of symptom of our times, where in the postmodern times in which we live in, so much of our lives and so much of how we understand ourselves is through constructing narratives of the past. Say, for example, with myself and my music is an influence of jazz music, is an influence of somewhat of rock music, a lot of blues music, a lot of soul music, hip-hop music, all these sort of influences that I have easy access to through streaming and other means, and just the internet. I can sort of construct my identity through the influences and understanding of the past. And AI is largely just the best at doing that, right? Like AI, whereas I can hold a limited amount of at least conscious associations within my memory, AI has millions of associations, and they can look between them and so on at a much faster pace to spit out something that has my influences way better. Which goes back to, and this is a little bit of a tangent, I remember when DALL-E just came out, the software, the AI where you can generate pictures and so on. My first couple searches with DALL-E, I was so enthralled because I was able to put random words together, random associations, and the AI would spit out an image that I wouldn't even dream of, right? And this was so cool to me. I was like, oh, this is such a creative thing. I can generate things that I couldn't even dream of. And I remember when Adam Neely, music bass player and, video essayist, jazz prodigy extraordinaire guy, I remember a few years ago, he collaborated with a group of people to put out an infinite bass line on YouTube. And at that time, I was like, this is so cool. I can just, whenever I need a creative bass line, I just go on YouTube, open this channel, there's a bass line playing, just capture stuff, sample it. The creative bounds are sort of endless there. So ultimately, again, going back to the subject at hand, we're kind of always running into problems of originality and creativity. These arguments will keep going, and they won't stop. So how do we get out of this loop? So looking back over the video, I feel like it might make sense to go over some specific examples of what I'm talking about to see it more in action. This first clip I want to show is Timbaland sort of discussing and explaining his thought process and how he sees the technology that Suno delivers.
I use Suno for a tool. So as I was with them building on this tool, there are a lot of, as you build, I uploaded all my beats, how I use it as a producer tool, like a sampler, right? Mm-hmm. So it gives you personas. And what I did, I started learning more and more how to become a prompt operator. Mm-hmm. So I never trained off of, you can't train it. You have to It has to learn you. You know what I'm saying? You got to learn how to prompt to get the best product out of this tool. So
Right.
it's not about training it. It's about you learning how to work with it. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Learning code, learning like, okay, if I say, yo, I call it Baby Timbo. So if I say Baby Timbo, I need my 808 to hit a little harder. I ain't make it hit harder. The one that, like, now remind you, I'm giving it original Timbo beats. So it's not like I'm using it to generate how I call that the karaoke side, right? I call that like, you know, mom and whatever. But I give it all my, cause you know, Guru, I got drives and drives of music. That's number one. So I give it my beats that's like, oh, I can reimagine my beats. But in order to reimagine, you have to learn how to prompt. And I'm like, yo, this text to music is gonna be a new wave. But it was aggravating to me because I said, yo, this ain't music, this ain't blah, 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 blah. But I'm like, yo, this is a way to get inspired and never be blocked.
So here it's clear that Timbo is just seeing AI and Suno as just another tool, just like samplers were, just like MPCs were, just like synthesizers were, just like pianos were, just like guitars were, just like writing was. The technology, how it's made, all of that kind of doesn't really matter to him. All that matters is that, hey, this is a cool technology that can be used to enhance creativity. If you followed me so far in this video, you can probably guess what the response is going to be to Timbaland's enthusiastic embrace of Suno and all of its creative potential from the opposition that cares so deeply about originality and these metaphysical couples that David Gunkel talks about.
We wanted to make sure, this is me as a professor, as a teacher, you know, I'm
Sure.
over there, Jay gave me the green light, and we over there with LIU, with the university, right? So it's us teaching musicians, not only just regular music or how to play, but the business and all of it. So one of the things that I'm big on is not giving a fourth grader a calculator, right? I want you to learn how to add first. So I think one of the things that people are skipping over is that you put in your hours of learning your craft,
Yes.
right? And I also, it's big for me where I'm like, certain people will have opinions that maybe have one song, never have done anything, where it's just like, no, Tim has put in his hours.
I think Guru puts it pretty poetically here, even though it is all too predictable. His argument when he says, you know, don't want to give a fourth grader a calculator is that you got to learn the instrument first before you're able to use a tool that makes it a lot easier. Well, couldn't the same argumentation be used against producers, hip-hop producers in the 90s? People, legendary producers like Ninth Wonder or Jay Dilla, be like, oh, you need to be a piano virtuoso before you can sample Oscar Peterson. Like that doesn't make much sense. It crumbles. It's really hard to make these arguments, and ultimately they just keep going in circles and in circles and in circles. This debate is very long, which I guess speaks for itself. They kind of just circle for 4 hours on the same exact argumentation, if little differences here and there. But there's a lot of good stuff there. I recommend watching it if you want to learn more. I could do a bigger video about that if you want, but let's get back to solutions. Because we seem to be in this loop and it doesn't seem much hope to getting out. Well, David Gunkel in Of Remixology talks about this a bit in a way that I thought was pretty poignant, because even though, as philosophers do, they usually are best at asking questions, not the best at answering them, he does try to answer them a little bit, largely by asking even more questions. But here is one way that he tries to conceptualize it. He references Slavoj Žižek, which is one of the, as Chomsky calls him, one of the best charlatans of our age. And in some ways, get it. Slavoj Žižek has always been kind of a clown. He goes on to his little speeches and tries to make jokes to make people laugh. But it's funny because his books are way more serious than his speeches. So I think a lot of people don't really understand the depth in which he writes and the depth of his understanding on a lot of things. But one thing that Gunkel talks about is Žižek's conceptions of Ptolemy and Copernicus. If you don't know those names, Ptolemy was the scientist, the astronomer, I guess you can call him, that was concerned with trying to understand planets and how the Earth is situated within the planetary structure in relation to the sun. And Ptolemy spent a whole bunch of time trying to further the science of the time to try to prove that the Earth was the center of the universe, of the solar system, to make sure that this previous understanding, to try to prove it, to make sure that it was right. If you don't know, this common science at the time is what Thomas Kuhn, who's the inventor of the word paradigm, that I'm sure you've heard, or you've heard in passing and so on. Normal science, according to Kuhn, is just the science that people do every day to advance the paradigm of the time. So the paradigm of the time was that the Earth is the center of the solar system, and that the scientists at that time are trying to further that method of understanding to understand the universe better. Then came Copernicus. Copernicus ripped up that paradigm and started a new one by proving that actually no, the sun is not far off away from the Earth. The Earth is not the center of the universe, but rather the sun is the center of the solar system, which blew the whole normal science completely open. It happened again in many ways with the change from Newtonian to Einsteinian physics. We are in the Einsteinian paradigm right now, where physicists and scientists are trying to further push Einstein's theories to their limit until we have another paradigm break, a paradigm shift to another normal science, which we haven't had yet. But going back to Ptolemy and Copernicus, in relation to technology and plagiarism and all the stuff we've been talking about, these sort of binary wars constructed from the technology of writing. Going back to this, it's important that there's largely two major options here. One is the route that Ptolemy went down, which is trying to advance the current paradigm as far as possible. So we are still within the Platonic paradigm of understanding these sort of conceptual binaries of originality, authorship, and so on. And so going down this path is we're going to have to keep adding and reforming and adding all of these little footnotes to the standard copyright law as it exists today. So the people that are saying we just need more regulation, we need more reform, we're just going to keep making the copyright law more and more and more complex than it already is. It's already hundreds of pages long. It's extremely bloated. And proponents of this perspective say, well, this is the only option that we have, because trying to dismantle the whole thing is not possible. We just need basic reformation and adding on to the current copyright law to add exceptions to things. And we're going to have to do that with something like AI. But AI is hard. We're running into problems where the current paradigm is getting strained. We're not going to know how to really conquer this problem in a way that satisfies artists and make sure they get paid and plagiarism is still not acceptable and so on. The system that is getting very strained. So then you might say, well, then the other option is revolution. We just got to tear the whole thing up. The whole copyright system, the whole way of understanding these binaries in terms of plagiarism, in terms of originality, all of this needs to be crumpled up and thrown out the window, because obviously it's been far too strained. The copyright law is way too long. We have so many gaps in our understanding. We don't even know what an author is, right? If you really dig into it, what does it mean to actually be the sole author of something? Anybody that writes music seriously knows that when they're having an idea, oh, what if I did this with the song? What if I played this instrument? You don't know where that idea came from. You don't know how it happened. Are you really going to try to say that it was you? You know, like it's some input from, oh, you watched a video somewhere where somebody gave a suggestion and now you're pulling that up. So actually it's not your idea, it's the other person's idea. All of this is straining the current paradigm that we're living in so hard that we desperately need to change up our way that we understand the system. But the problem with revolutions tearing up the whole thing is, as Gunkel points out, and as a lot of deconstruction philosophers like Derrida and Foucault pointed out, is that oftentimes revolutions don't actually get rid of the system, they just inverse them. That now the people who are oppressed become the oppressors and vice versa. And so now you're going to get something that is part of the same logic, part of the same sort of conceptual system, but it's just in the reversed order. It's not a new system. It's not trying to change everything. It's just reversing it. So this is the danger that revolutions play. Going further, Gunkel points out that there are other ways to look at it, one of which is what he goes to Zizek again to talk about the parallax view. The parallax view is looking at something from different perspectives and constructing truth from those perspectives. The parallax view, according to Zizek, and how we would understand it in terms of the topic at hand, is that actually no, the DJ who is sampling and playing different pieces of music from other artists is not plagiarizing, and they're also not doing something original. The truth of what they're doing is in the gap between those concepts of originality and plagiarism. And embracing that sort of gap itself is what brings validity and truth to that system. And in the end, this is largely how Gunkel proposes his solutions. His solutions are to, not in any sort of specific legislative sense, because as he admits himself, he's not a legislator, or he doesn't know as much about that world, but to try to make it so that we preserve artists getting paid and artists being able to have some sort of ownership over their work that they created, which again, all of these concepts are kind of up in the air. But then, so giving a little bit of credence, a little bit of love to that side, but then a little bit of love to the other side and saying, well, after a few years, the copyright's out the window. So it's not that now, finally, a lot of Disney stuff is not copyrighted, but it's been a very, very long time. No, make this way shorter, just like a few years. And then it's completely open game so that anybody can use that art to create their own art. Again, looking at these solutions is really tough to do and is largely out of the scope of this video. But in terms of solutions and going back to Suno and Timbaland in this situation, I want to go back and look at some of the ways in which this situation is more complex than it seems on the surface. Where for somebody like Timbaland, his perspective is not that he wants to rip off artists, not that he wants to make artistry go extinct. From his perspective, he wants to be involved in a technology that is just taking off, that not only he can benefit from, but a lot of people in his community.
We couldn't have the time to go build an app, but what was built for us to go get this idea off so we can go somewhere else. We brought it back. We did tremendous things off of an idea on somebody else's IP to build our own IP. And I think the model of today is, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and speak and say what we need, but we need to, as a unit, start building IP, not being the product. We need to be the enterprise. We need to take these tools and build out a whole infrastructure. Whether we hiring the writers complaining in Hollywood, man, I ain't got no right. Well, guess what? We got to use these tools. You see now the Bigfoot Yeti. Those guys are going to build all this content while we sitting here complaining about all this stuff. But these tools are here for us to build. Mm-hmm. These tools are for to build our organization on how we see it. Is there a lot of things that got to be changed? Yes, I'm willing to go in there and speak. But what are we going to do in the meantime? Mm-hmm. What we gonna build in the meantime? Is it this language model? Is this what are we building on these platforms? Don't tell me I can't build out a world. Y'all just looking at artists. I wouldn't. No, my first love is working with the independent artists. But as me, Timbo, as I'm older now, I'm always fascinated about these technology too. So I'm like, yo, I would go this way. I would go this way. Now I know there's problems. I know there's this. Right. That's why we up here having this AI talk. But don't condemn my creativity because you don't know what I'm trying to build. I'm saying, yo, we can go hire this director. He going through it, but he can go build this on VO3. You got Flow. All these technology companies I be posting on my page. We need, Black people are the most creative people in the world. And we not building stuff and all we do is gonna complain, but we ain't gonna build nothing on top of this? Come on, bro. Like T Grizzly right now ain't rapping because he figured out a way to build a server on GTA 6 Oh, not 6, but the new GTA, and build out a character and build a gaming world. He's making $50,000 a week. Like, bro, think about that. That could never be imaginable. But he said, you know what? I ain't gonna complain. You could build servers. You can do this. It's a lot of things we can do on top of these tools.
Technology exists within associations of a bunch of other things. Technology is not in a vacuum. Technology is not purely it's technology outside of the social sphere. The social sphere is in the technology. So if we understand it in this way, historically, when new technologies are invented, when new ways of commerce are invented, the most underprivileged people are shut out of it. And in this case, in music, the Black community has historically been shut out of these financial opportunities, getting their feet in the door to reap some of the rewards of even their own art. So Timbaland's saying this is a chance that we can get the Black community involved more to get more people some checks, so we get some more people in the business to get some money. And this is not really a topic that I can really talk at length about because I'm not part of the Black community, obviously. But it's important to recognize that these things have larger social dimensions. This is why I get frustrated at people like Anthony Fantano, for example, who's been talking about this a lot recently, is because we're ignoring that in order to have a coalition of people that look at AI, that want to understand it as a predatory technology, that understand that artists have to get paid, to understand the situation fully, we have to understand it in its social context. You're never going to get through to Timbaland if you're just saying this guy's terrible, he doesn't understand the situation. Timbaland even had a conversation with a bunch of people and posted it on his YouTube channel. He's very open to conversation. I have a lot of problems with his perspective. I have a lot of problems with what he said about Suno and his perception of the technology and of the issue. I think that he's very misguided and and has a lot of misunderstandings of what's going on. But we're not helping anything. We're not helping anyone if the people that are closer to the community that we cherish, the beat makers, the producers, if we're just yelling at them the whole time. This is why if you look at the conversation that Timbaland had with a lot of other big producers like Guru was not like talking down on Tim. He was giving him some harsh truths a lot of the time, but he was never saying, you're the problem, you're doing all this bad. It might get to that point, right? It could get to the point where Timbaland all of a sudden is now the head of a super predatory AI music system, and there's no other choice but to just say, you're messing up, this is terrible, and you got to stop this now, you are the enemy, and stuff like that. But it's not going to help, right? Because people are going to want to make money, and people's pockets are going to speak louder than your activism for most of the time. So I don't know. These are just my 2 thoughts on it. I know this video, again, was a little bit all over the place, but that's kind of how scattered it is. These issues go back thousands of years, and we're still sort of arguing in circles, and it can get very confusing. So if you watch this video and you come away with it like, oh, maybe I'm not insane for thinking that I'm insane, for thinking that this whole thing just feels so complex and it's not going anywhere and stuff like that. Just know that you're not alone in that, and honestly, it probably just means that you're looking at it decently accurately.